When my wife collapsed in our backyard last spring, I was certain I was losing her to a heart attack. The doctors confirmed it was natural causes. Then my wife passed away. But exactly 1 week after we lowered her casket into the ground, her physician called me with a message that stopped my heart. "Mr. Miller, there is a severe error in the final toxicology report. Come to my office immediately. Do not bring your daughter. Do not bring your son-in-law. Your survival depends on this." When I walked into that office and saw the red ink on the paper, I realized I was living with monsters. I spent 40 years fighting gravity. In Seattle, I built skeletons of steel and wrapped them in glass, keeping skyscrapers standing against the wind and the rain. I learned to spot a hairline fracture in a concrete foundation from 10 yards away. I knew that if you ignored a stress crack, the whole thing would eventually come down, but I missed the cracks in my own house. I didn't see the collapse coming until the day my wife hit the garden dirt. It happened fast. There was no warning, no creaking of the beams, just the soft thud of a metal trowel dropping onto a stone paver. I turned around. Alice was folding into the rose bushes, her body going limp like a puppet with cut strings. "Alice!" I dropped my wrench. The metal rang against the patio stones. I hit my knees beside her, the damp earth soaking instantly into my jeans. I grabbed her shoulders. They felt small, fragile. "Look at me. Alice, look at me!" She didn't answer. Her eyes were rolled back, staring at nothing. Her lips, usually pink and smiling, were already turning a terrifying shade of blue. My hands, thick and calloused from decades of handling rebar, shook as I fumbled for a pulse. It was faint, fluttering like a trapped bird. Then it stopped. The hospital smelled of bleach and impending bad news. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound that burrowed into my skull. Dr. Richard Evans walked out of the double doors. I had known Richard for 20 years. We played poker on Thursdays. But today he couldn't look me in the eye. He stared at the scuffed linoleum tiles. "I'm sorry, Frank," he whispered. The words hung in the sterile air. "It was a massive stroke. We couldn't stop it. She's gone." He didn't say anything else. He didn't offer a medical explanation. He just stood there, staring at the floor, shifting his weight from foot to foot. Silence. That silence hit me harder than a wrecking ball. 37 years of marriage. Coffee in the morning, bills on the counter, the warmth on the other side of the bed. All of it, erased in a single heartbeat. I stood there, a structural engineer who couldn't fix the only thing that mattered. The foundation of my life was gone. An hour later, the waiting room doors swung open. My daughter Jessica walked in. She was sobbing, a loud, jagged sound that echoed off the hard walls. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. Behind her walked Brad, her husband. Brad didn't shed a tear. He smoothed the front of his custom-tailored suit. Italian silk, charcoal gray, worth more than the truck I drove. He looked around the room, his eyes darting, calculating. He wasn't looking for me. He was looking for an exit. The room went deathly quiet. The only sound was the hum of the vending machine in the corner. Brad pulled back his sleeve. The hospital lights caught the face of his heavy gold Patek Philippe watch. He checked the time, then looked at me. His expression was flat, empty. In full, Hen's expression was flat, empty. "Such a tragedy, Frank," Brad said. His voice lacked any texture of grief. It was smooth, practiced. "Let us know what we can do to speed up the paperwork." Paperwork. My throat burned. I swallowed the bile rising in my chest. My wife's body wasn't even cold yet, and he was thinking about forms, about death certificates, about assets. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes didn't match the somber tone of his voice. "Stress fracture," my mind whispered. "Something here is bearing too much weight." "We'll handle it," I said. My voice sounded like grinding gravel. I wasn't going to let him see me break. Not here, not in front of him. Alice always told me. Brad loved money more than he loved our daughter. She used to say he looked at people like they were ATMs. I thought she was just being protective. I didn't know she was the only one seeing the blueprint clearly. 3 days later, we lowered Alice into the ground at Lakeview Cemetery. The Seattle sky was true to form, bruised, dark gray, and weeping freezing rain. The wind whipped through the trees, stripping the last of the autumn leaves. The priest spoke about eternal peace and light. I didn't hear a word. I stared at the dark hole in the earth. It looked final. It looked like a mistake. I stood next to Jessica. She was hiding behind oversized designer sunglasses, even though there wasn't a ray of sun for miles. She kept biting her lower lip, gnawing on it. It was a habit she'd had since she was 6 years old, something she only did when she was lying or hiding something. Brad stood beside her. He smelled of nervous sweat mixed with $1,000 cologne. He wasn't looking at the casket. He was checking his phone, shielding the screen from the rain with his hand. His foot tapped a frantic rhythm against the wet grass. Tap, tap, tap. Then the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier. A man stepped up to the edge of the grave. He didn't belong here. He wasn't family. He wasn't a friend. He wore a cheap leather jacket that had seen too many bar fights. A thick white scar ran across his jawline. He was rolling a silver coin across his knuckles. Flip, catch. Flip, catch. Vince. I knew the type. You see them on job sites sometimes, collecting debts from the desperate guys who gambled away their paychecks. Vince stepped dangerously close to Brad, ignoring the priest, ignoring the coffin, ignoring me. Friday noon, Brad, Vince whispered. His voice was rough like a saw cutting through dry wood. Tony doesn't do extensions. Brad turned the color of ash. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a primal, shaking fear. He nodded fast, his eyes wide. I know, Brad mouthed. Vince smirked. He flipped his coin one last time, caught it with a snap, and walked away, disappearing into the mist and the freezing rain. My neighbor Helen stepped up beside me. Helen was the neighborhood watch. She lived her life peering through her blinds. She knew when you took out your trash and when you bought new milk. Usually she annoyed me. Today she looked terrified. She was twisting her pearl ring around her finger, over and over. Her eyes were red-rimmed. Frank, she whispered, leaning in close so the wind wouldn't carry her words. I need to tell you something. Before they hear. I looked down at her. Tell me what, Helen? She glanced over her shoulder at Brad and Jessica, who were now walking quickly toward their car. While you were at the hospital, right after the ambulance left. Helen's voice shook. Brad came back to your house. I saw him from my kitchen window. He wasn't crying, Frank. He was running. He went into Alice's home office. He came out with a box of her files. My pulse began to pound in my ears, drowning out the rain. Files. Not photos. Not mementos. Financial records. Thank you, Helen, I said softly. I watched Brad's luxury car tear out of the cemetery parking lot, mud spinning from the tires. They weren't grieving. They were hunting. And now I knew I was the prey. The community hall was a low-ceilinged box of fluorescent light and forced conversation. It smelled of stale coffee, damp wool, and the cloying scent of lilies that were already starting to wilt. I walked through the room like a ghost. People, neighbors, old colleagues, friends of Alice reached out to touch my arm or pat my back. They offered hollow whispers. She's in a better place. Time heals all wounds. They meant well, but their sympathy felt like wet plaster, heavy, cold, and useless. I nodded. I shook hands. I moved toward the back corner, away from the noise. I sat in a folding chair near the emergency exit. The metal was cold against my back. From here I could see the whole room. I was an observer now, checking the structural integrity of the people left behind. My eyes found them instantly. Brad had pulled Jessica into a shadowed alcove near the coffee station, behind a decorative plastic ficus tree. To anyone else it looked like a husband comforting his grieving wife. He had his hand on her shoulder. But I knew stress points. I knew tension. Brad's fingers were digging into her silk dress, bunching the fabric. His neck was flushed a splotchy red. Jessica wasn't crying anymore. She was trembling, her head bowed low, looking at her shoes like a scolded child. I reached up behind my left ear. My hearing aids weren't the standard-issue beige plastic lumps. They were high-end, custom-molded amplifiers I'd bought to hear the subtle hiss of escaping steam on job sites or the whisper of settling foundations. They had a directional microphone setting. I pretended to stare at the leather-bound guestbook on my lap. Slowly, deliberately, I reached up and spun the volume dial. Click, click, Max. The room's ambient noise, the clinking of spoons, the murmur of voices, exploded into a roar of static. I wincing, tapping the side of the device to filter the feedback. Then I focused. I locked onto the frequency of their voices 30 feet away. The world narrowed down to that alcove. We need into the house, Jess, Brad's voice hissed in my ear. It sounded tinny, magnified and desperate. Tonight. Jessica shook her head, a jerky, frightened motion. We can't yet, she whispered. I could hear the wet catch in her throat. The will reading isn't until next week. It's too soon. I don't have next week, Brad snapped. The volume was so high I heard the fabric of his jacket rustle as he leaned in closer. Tony called again. The deadline moved up. I owe him $850,000 by Friday noon. My hand froze over the guest book. $850,000? Jessica gasped softly. You said it was half that. You said 400. Interest piles up, Jess. It's shark math. If I don't pay, I'm a dead man. Vince wasn't joking at the cemetery. But Dad, Jessica started. Forget him, Brad cut her off. His voice dropped lower, colder. We need Alice's life insurance. That's $4 million, plus the house equity. It solves everything. We pay Tony, we keep the condo, we're free. Dad is the primary beneficiary, Jessica whispered. It's his money. Then we need him to sign the power of attorney, Brad said. Tonight, while he's confused, while he's grieving. We get him to sign over control of the assets to us for safekeeping. I stared at the page in front of me. The names of the guests blurred into ink blots. They weren't just greedy. They were desperate. They were cornered rats. Dull. And if he doesn't sign? Jessica asked. Her voice was barely a breath. There was a pause, a silence that stretched so tight I thought it would snap the wire in my ear. Brad didn't blink. Through the gap in the leaves I saw his face. It was completely void of humanity. Then he has an accident, Brad said flatly. Old men fall downstairs all the time. Hips break, heads hit concrete. My heart stopped. It didn't flutter. It just seized. Just like your mother, Brad added. The room tilted. The floor seemed to drop away beneath my feet. Just like your mother. The words echoed in my skull, louder than the amplified noise. It wasn't a stroke. It wasn't natural causes. My daughter didn't recoil. She didn't slap him. She didn't scream for help. She just looked at the floor, chewing that lip, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. She knew. She had known all along. They hadn't just watched my wife die. They had helped the process along. A cold, hard numbness spread through my chest. It wasn't fear. It was the icy clarity of a man watching a bridge collapse in slow motion. The structure had failed. The load was too heavy. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table. I am an engineer. When a wall is falling, you don't punch it. You brace for impact. You assess the damage. You calculate the next move. I slowly turned the volume dial down. The roar of the room faded back to a dull hum. I stood up. My knees popped. I grabbed my cane, a heavy piece of hickory I barely needed but carried for appearances. I walked out the back doors into the freezing rain without saying a single word to anyone. The cold air hit my face like a slap. I walked to my truck, my boots crunching on the wet gravel. I got inside and locked the doors. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard, the leather creaked, just like your mother. I was going to kill him. I was going to wrap my hands around his neck and squeeze until the light went out. Beezy's tea. Beezy's tea. My phone vibrated violently on the dashboard, startling me. I stared at the screen. Dr. Evans. Why was Richard calling me? He had just seen me at the funeral. I picked up. Yeah, Frank. Richard's voice was incredibly tight. It trembled. Where are you? Leaving the reception. Heart fart. Reese's voice was incredibly tight. It trembled. Where are you? Leaving the reception. Don't go home, Richard said. Come to my clinic. Now, the back entrance. Come alone. Richard, I'm not in the mood for Frank. Listen to me. He snapped, abandoning his usual calm bedside manner. The toxicology report just came back from the lab. The toxicology report just came back from the lab. There's something you need to see. The police are already here. I lowered the phone. I looked through the rain-streaked windshield toward the community hall. I could see the silhouette of Brad standing in the window, checking his watch. The game had changed. I put the truck in gear. The tires screeched against the wet pavement as I peeled out of the lot, driving not toward the safety of my home, but toward the truth that would destroy what little I had left. I drove like a man possessed. The windshield wipers couldn't keep up with the deluge, slapping a frantic rhythm against the glass. The city lights smeared into long, watery streaks of red and yellow. I ran 2 red lights. I didn't care. Just like your mother. The words were a parasite, burrowing deeper into the gray matter of my brain. I pulled into the alley behind Dr. Evans' clinic. It was a narrow, brick-lined throat of a street, cluttered with dumpsters overflowing with medical waste. I killed the engine. My hands were shaking so bad I had to use both of them to pull the keys from the ignition. The back door was heavy steel. I didn't have to knock, it buzzed open the second I stepped near the camera. Inside, the clinic was a tomb of shadows and stainless steel. The waiting room was empty, the magazines stacked in perfect, untouched piles. The air smelled of harsh industrial cleaner and stale, burnt coffee. Dr. Evans was standing in his private office. The blinds were drawn tight. He wasn't wearing his white coat. He looked smaller without it. Just a tired man in a wrinkled dress shirt. He wasn't alone. A man was leaning against the far wall, half in shadow. He was built like a retaining wall, solid, immovable. He wore a cheap gray suit that had seen too many double shifts. He was chewing on a wooden toothpick, rolling it from one side of his mouth to the other. "Sit down, Frank," the stranger said. His voice was gravel, low, and devoid of sympathy. I didn't sit. I gripped the back of the patient chair. "Who are you?" "Detective Mark Sullivan. Homicide." The word hung in the air like smoke. Homicide. Sullivan didn't offer a hand. He reached into a manila folder on the desk and slid a thick document across the cold metal surface. "Frank, listen to me carefully," Sullivan said, stepping into the light. His eyes were hard, tired flint. "We ran a full toxicology screen on Alice. Standard procedure when the attending physician, Dr. Evans here, notes an irregularity in the heart rhythm post-mortem." I looked at Evans. He was wiping his glasses frantically with his tie. He couldn't meet my eyes. I didn't want to believe it, Frank," Evans whispered, "but the EKG readings were wrong. Too chaotic for a simple stroke." "Look at the report," Sullivan commanded. I looked. It was a grid of numbers and chemical names. I didn't understand it. "I'm an engineer, not a chemist." "She was poisoned," Sullivan said flatly. The room spun. I gripped the chair harder. "Poisoned? How? Who?" Dr. Evans pointed a shaking finger at a highlighted line in red ink. "Digoxin. Alice took this for her heart condition," Evans said. "Her prescribed dose was 0.125 milligrams. A maintenance dose. Tiny." He took a breath, his voice cracking. The level in her blood at the time of death was 9.5 nanograms per milliliter. "That's not a dose, Frank? That's a massive, lethal overdose." "Accident?" I rasped. "Could she have taken too many?" Sullivan shook his head slowly. The toothpick snapped in his teeth. "It wasn't one big pill, Frank. The tissue samples show accumulation. Someone was slipping it into her food for months. A slow drip of death, faking a natural decline, making her dizzy, making her confused, making her weak. My knees gave out. I collapsed into the chair. Months. I thought back to the dinners, the Sunday brunches, Alice complaining that her coffee tasted bitter, Alice feeling nauseous after tea. "We checked the pharmacy records," Sullivan continued, relentless. He pulled out a second stack of papers. Receipts. Thermal paper, curling at the edges. 7 early refills in 6 months. 3 different pharmacies across the city to avoid flagging the system. He pushed the papers under my nose. "Look at the signature, Frank." I didn't want to look. I wanted to close my eyes and wake up in my bed, with Alice asleep beside me, but I forced my head down. I knew that handwriting. I had taught the hand that wrote it how to hold a crayon. I had watched that hand sign a marriage license to a man I despised. The loopy J. The sharp, aggressive M. Jessica Miller. The air left my lungs. It wasn't just Brad. My little girl. The one I built a treehouse for. The one I carried on my shoulders at the zoo. She had walked into a pharmacy, bought the weapon, drove to her mother's house, and poisoned the tea. She had watched her mother drink it. She had watched her mother die, inch by inch, day by day. She knew, Evans whispered. He opened a drawer and pulled out a small, leather-bound book, Alice's personal journal. "Alice gave this to me 2 weeks ago for safekeeping," Evans said. "She was scared, Frank. She didn't want to worry you until she was sure." He opened to the final entries. April 4th. Coffee tasted bitter again. Jessica made it. I poured half of it in the plant when she wasn't looking. April 10th. Brad asked about the life insurance again. Felt dizzy after tea. My chest hurts. Sullivan tapped a page with a printed spreadsheet staple gun to it. "She found $600,000 missing from her investment accounts," Sullivan said. "She traced the wire transfers. They went to an offshore account in the Caymans. Brad's account. She was filing embezzlement charges the week she died," Sullivan finished. She was going to the police on Monday. She died on Sunday. The silence in the room was absolute. The hum of the refrigerator in the corner sounded like a scream. The foundation hadn't just cracked. It had been dynamited. My wife was murdered by my daughter and her husband because they got greedy, because they got caught stealing. I stood up. I felt strangely light. The grief was gone. In its place was something else, something cold and hard and sharp. A steel beam that wouldn't bend. They are planning to kill me tonight, I said. My voice was steady, terrifyingly steady. Sullivan blinked. What? I heard them at the funeral reception, I said. They need me to sign a power of attorney. If I don't, I have an accident. Just like Alice. Sullivan looked at Evans, then back at me. He nodded slowly. A predator recognizing prey. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a tiny black device. It was a wire, no bigger than a shirt button, with a thin adhesive strip. We have enough for an arrest on the embezzlement, Sullivan said. But for murder, we need a confession. We need them to say it out loud, to a jury. A receipt is just a piece of paper. A recording is a conviction. He held the wire out to me. You have to go home, Frank, Sullivan said. His voice dropped to a whisper. You have to walk into that house with the people who killed your wife. You have to play the confused, grieving old man. You have to get them to admit it. I looked at the wire. Then I looked at the detective. Tape it to my chest, I said. The drive home was a blur of rain and red taillights. I could feel the medical tape pulling at the hair on my chest, a constant itching reminder of the wire pressed against my sternum. It felt heavy, like a lead weight. I wasn't Frank the husband anymore. I wasn't Frank the father. I was an engineer inspecting a condemned building. I had to walk into the collapse zone and not let anyone know I saw the cracks. The house loomed out of the darkness at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was a sprawling 2-story colonial I had renovated with my own hands 15 years ago. I knew every joist, every wire, every pipe. It used to look like a sanctuary. Now, with the windows dark and the rain lashing against the siding, it looked like a trap. I pulled into the driveway. My hands were shaking. But this time, it wasn't from grief. It was adrenaline. Cold, focused rage. I tapped the wire through my shirt. 1, 2. The tiny red light blinked once in acknowledgement, then went dark to save battery. I grabbed my cane. I hunched my shoulders. I practiced the shuffle I'd seen 1,000 old men do in nursing homes. The confused, defeated shuffle. I pushed the heavy front door open. Hello? I called out. My voice trembled. It wasn't hard to fake. The terror was real enough. The scene inside stopped me dead. The foyer was a disaster zone. The antique hallway table was overturned. The rug was kicked up. Papers, Alice's papers, were scattered across the hardwood floor like confetti. Brad appeared at the top of the stairs. He was sweating. His expensive shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, and his hair was a mess. Frank? Thank God, Brad breathed out. He hurried down the stairs, skipping the last 2 steps. His face was a mask of panic, but his eyes were calculating. What happened? I stammered, leaning heavily on my cane. We thought we had a break-in, Brad lied. The lie came out smooth, polished. We came by to check on the house and found the back door open. We're securing the assets for you, Frank, making sure nothing important was taken. Lies. He wasn't securing assets. He was tearing the house apart looking for the hard copy of the life insurance policy. He was looking for the will. I looked at the chaos. Drawers ripped out of the desk in the study. Books pulled off the shelves. This wasn't a burglary. This was a frantic search. I don't understand, I mumbled, raising a hand to my forehead. My head, it's so foggy. Jessica walked out of the kitchen. She stopped when she saw me. She was holding a glass of water. Her knuckles were white. She was biting that lip again, harder now, almost drawing blood. It's just the grief, Dad, she said softly. Her voice was thin, brittle. You're in shock. It makes everything confusing. She walked over to me. She reached out and touched my arm. Her hand felt like ice. It felt like a stranger's hand. I had to use every ounce of willpower not to recoil, not to smack her hand away. This was the hand that signed the receipts. This was the hand that poured the poison. Come sit down, she said. Brad, help him. Brad grabbed my other arm. His grip was too tight, impatient. Impatient the line $100. Put skoot naturprim. Impatient the line $100. To she's about how bull boot brag kolp. She's ed tormindu bitham was ket relevant. Tot filled the $2 boyers. They had should say proceeding. And wait on this train, but he can a show popping the swat on cars of blade, then a jump king. My tooth will is start while it be John, bit arm. Watchers it a wote into which tube. In Falpination, the yours stop predal alt re or chew pelt. In not way one. We have a lawyer coming in the morning, Frank, Brad said quickly, steering me toward the living room sofa. To help sort this mess out, you just need to rest tonight. Get your strength back. They sat me down. I slumped into the cushions, letting my mouth hang open slightly, staring blankly at the unlit fireplace. I just want to sleep, I whispered. That's a good idea, Brad said. He looked at Jessica. A silent signal passed between them. Why don't you go up to the guest room? The master bedroom is, well, it's a mess right now. Because you tossed it, I thought. Okay, I said. I let them help me up the stairs. I let them guide me into the guest room. I let Jessica pull the quilt over my legs. Good night, Dad, she said. She stood in the doorway for a second, her silhouette framed by the hall light. For a brief moment, she looked like my little girl again. Then she closed the door. The latch clicked. I waited. I counted to 60. Then 60 again. I threw off the quilt. I sat up. The confused old man vanished. I crept to the door. I didn't open it. I pressed my ear against the wood. My hearing aids were still in, cranked to maximum volume. The house was old, but the vents carried sound like a telephone line. I heard them downstairs in the kitchen. He's losing it. Brad's voice drifted up through the floorboards. He sounded relieved. Did you see him? He can barely stand. Perfect timing. There was the sound of glass hitting granite. A bottle being opened. Do we really have to do it, Brad? Jessica's voice. It was trembling. He's my dad. My heart hammered against the wire. Say it. Speak up for me, Jessica. Please. We don't have a choice, Jess. Brad snapped. Tony gave me until noon tomorrow. If I don't pay, I'm dead. And if I'm dead, you go down for the embezzlement alone. Do you want to go to prison? Silence. We need the money, Brad continued, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. Once he signs the power of attorney tomorrow morning, we control the accounts. We transfer the liquid cash immediately. And then? Jessica asked. Then he falls down the stairs, Brad said. He laughed, a cold, hollow sound that made my blood freeze. Old men fall all the time. Clumsy, confused, tragedy strikes twice in the same family. It's sad, but it happens. I waited for Jessica to argue. I waited for her to say no, to say that's too far, to say I love him. I heard the clink of a glass. Make sure it looks like an accident, Jessica whispered. I closed my eyes. A single tear leaked out, hot and stinging. It rolled down my cheek and hit the collar of my shirt, soaking into the tape holding the wire. The last pillar of my life crumbled into dust. She wasn't a victim. She wasn't coerced. She was protecting herself. She was choosing her thief of a husband over the father who raised her. I backed away from the door. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I looked at my hands. They were steady now. The shaking had stopped. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was done building. It was time to bring the whole structure down. The house settled into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only sound was the rain drumming against the guest room window, a rhythmic tapping that felt like a countdown. I lay on top of the covers, fully dressed. My hand rested over my chest, shielding the wire. The adhesive itched, but the pain grounded me. It was the only thing that felt real. Downstairs, the lights had finally gone out. I heard the heavy thud of the master bedroom door closing. Brad and Jessica were sleeping in my bed, in Alice's bed. I stared at the ceiling shadows. I wasn't waiting for sleep. I was waiting for a signal. At 2 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. A single, short vibration. I grabbed it. The screen illuminated my face in a ghostly blue light. Frank, back door. Now, keep the lights off. It was Marcus Thorne, Alice's old accounting partner, a man who treated tax law like a religion and viewed embezzlement as a mortal sin. I slipped off the bed. I didn't need a flashlight. I had built this house. I knew every inch of it. I knew the third step from the top creaked if you stepped in the center, so I hugged the wall. I knew the hallway floorboard outside the kitchen groaned, so I stepped over it. I moved like a shadow through the home I had raised my family in. I reached the kitchen. It was pitch black, smelling faintly of the expensive scotch Brad had been drinking earlier. I unlocked the deadbolt on the back door. The mechanism slid back with a soft, well-oiled snick. I opened the door just enough to let a sliver of the storm inside. Marcus stood on the porch, drenched. He was shivering violently, clutching a plastic-wrapped manila envelope to his chest. He looked like a wet rat in a suit. "Frank," he hissed. He wiped his fogged-up glasses on his sleeve, but it just smeared the rain. "I shouldn't be here. If Brad sees me, come inside," I whispered, pulling him into the mudroom. I didn't turn on the lights. The ambient glow from the street lamps outside filtered through the blinds, painting us in stripes of gray and black. "Alice sent me a hidden file before she died," Marcus whispered, his voice shaking. "An encrypted zip drive. She mailed it to my office, not the house. Not the house. I just cracked the password tonight." He handed me the envelope. It was heavy. "Brad didn't just have gambling debts, Frank. The money wasn't going to casinos." My jaw tightened. "Where was it going?" Marcus looked at the floor, unable to meet my gaze in the dim light. "He has a condo in Chicago, in a woman's name, Chloe Vance. She's 24. I felt a fresh wave of nausea. "A mistress, of course. Does Jessica know?" I asked. The silence that followed was worse than the thunder outside. Marcus took a deep breath. "Look at the printed emails, Frank. The last page." I pulled a small penlight from my pocket, an engineer's habit, and shielded the beam with my hand. I shone it on the paper. It was an email chain between Alice and Jessica, dated 3 weeks ago. From Alice Jessica, "I have proof. He bought her an apartment with our savings. He is leaving you. You have to open your eyes. He is using us." I moved the light down to the reply. From Jessica. "I didn't mean to hide it, Mom, but I don't care. I won't lose him. If you try to ruin this for me, I will never forgive you. Mind your own business. He loves me. He just needs money to fix this mistake." The light trembled in my hand. The paper shook. Lies. She always smiled when she lied. But this was something else. This was a structural failure of the soul. The final pillar of my family shattered into dust. Jessica knew. She knew Brad was stealing. She knew Brad was cheating. She knew he was planning to leave her for a woman half her age. And yet, she killed her own mother, my Alice, just to keep him. She was going to let him kill me, her own father, just to buy his affection for a few more months. She wasn't a victim of manipulation. She was a willing accomplice to her own destruction. She chose him, I whispered. The realization was cold, like a steel beam in winter. She chose the monster. "Frank," Marcus said softly, reaching for the door handle, "I have to go. If they find me here." "Go," I said. "Take the files to Detective Sullivan. He's expecting them." Marcus nodded and slipped out into the night. I locked the door behind him. I stood alone in the dark kitchen. The grief I had felt for days finally evaporated. It was replaced by a terrifying calm. I wasn't a father anymore. I wasn't a husband. I was a demolition expert, and the building was coming down. The sun rose over Seattle like a bruise, a sickly purple light filtering through the heavy clouds. I hadn't slept, not for a single minute. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, gripping the porcelain sink. The face staring back was gray, lined with deep crevices of exhaustion. My eyes were red-rimmed. I looked like a man who had already died, but beneath the skin the framework held. I unbuttoned my pajama shirt. The medical tape on my chest was peeling at the edges, irritated by sweat. I pressed it back down, smoothing it over the tiny black wire. I tapped it twice. Blink, blink, recording. I wasn't a victim today. I was a structural engineer. When a building is condemned, you don't mourn it. You rig the charges. You control the demolition so it falls exactly where you want it to. I dressed slowly, a flannel shirt, heavy work pants. I put the wire back in place, ensuring the microphone was unobstructed by fabric. At 8 a.m., the bedroom door creaked open. Jessica walked in. She was holding a steaming ceramic mug. She was dressed in black again, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, trying to look like the grieving daughter. But her movements were too sharp, too jittery. "Morning, Dad," she said. Her voice was bright, forced. "I made your favorite, hazelnut roast. Drink up. It'll help with the fog." She set the mug on the nightstand. She didn't look at me. She looked at the floor, at the window, at the wall, anywhere but my eyes. "Thanks, honey," I rasped, keeping my voice weak. "I'll be downstairs," she said quickly. "Brad is setting up for the lawyer. Drink it while it's hot." She walked out, closing the door a little too fast. She didn't have the stomach to watch me take the first sip. I stared at the dark liquid. Steam curled off the surface. I leaned in and sniffed. It smelled like hazelnut, yes, but underneath, there was a metallic tang. Something acrid. Maybe it was real, maybe it was my imagination, but my gut twisted violently. Just like your mother. Just like your mother. I picked up the mug. My hand didn't shake. I walked over to the large potted fern in the corner of the room, a plant Alice had nurtured for 10 years. I poured the hot coffee straight into the soil. The earth hissed as it drank the poison. The steam rose up, carrying the scent of betrayal. The plant would likely be dead by noon. I set the empty mug back on the nightstand, leaving a dark ring on the wood. I grabbed my cane. It was time to go to work. I made my way downstairs, letting the cane thump heavily on each step. Thump, drag, thump, drag. The living room was staged. The papers were gone from the floor. The furniture was upright. It looked like a normal house, except for the tension vibrating in the air. Brad was pacing by the window. He was wearing a fresh shirt, but he was already sweating through the armpits. At 8:30 a.m., a sharp, aggressive knocking echoed from the front door. Brad froze. He checked his watch. That's too early. Bell isn't due until 9. He walked to the door and yanked it open, pasting a fake smile on his face. "Mr. Bell, your ear." The smile vanished. Standing on the porch was a young woman. She was striking blonde hair in a sharp bob, wearing a tight red leather jacket that looked like a scream against the gray morning. Chloe, the mistress. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped into the foyer, pushing Brad back. "Where is it, Brad?" she demanded. Her voice was loud, piercing. "You said Tuesday? It's Wednesday. My landlord is threatening to evict me." Brad turned a shade of pale green I'd only seen on seasick deckhands. He frantically looked toward the kitchen where Jessica was, then back at Chloe. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" he hissed, his voice strangling in his throat. "Are you insane? My wife is in the next room." "I don't care about your wife," Chloe yelled. She held out a hand, palm up. "I want the deed to the Chicago condo. You promised it was mine. You said the transfer was done." I stood on the bottom step, watching. The wire on my chest was recording every word. The pressure vessel was cracking. Brad was juggling a murder plot, a loan shark, and a mistress who knew too much. "Keep your voice down," Brad pleaded, grabbing her arm and shoving her back toward the open door. "I have it. It's coming. I need 2 hours. Please, Chloe, go to the Starbucks on Main. Wait for me." "You're lying to me, Brad," she spat. "I'm not. I'm getting the money right now," Brad whispered frantically. "Go. If she sees you, we lose everything." He practically threw her onto the porch and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt with a trembling hand. He leaned his forehead against the wood, gasping for air. "Who was that?" Jessica's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Brad spun around, his eyes wide and terrified. "Nobody," he said, too quickly. "Just a solicitor, selling solar panels. I got rid of him." Jessica narrowed her eyes. She bit her lip. She knew he was lying, but she didn't push. She was too focused on the bigger lie she was living. I shuffled into the room, leaning on my cane. "Who was at the door?" I asked, playing the fool. "Wrong address, Frank," Brad said, wiping sweat from his upper lip. "Go sit at the dining table. The lawyer is almost here." At 9 a.m. exactly, the doorbell rang again. This time it was Simon Bell. He walked in looking like a man marching to the gallows. He wore a cheap, wrinkled suit that was too large for his frame. He carried a battered leather briefcase. Simon was Brad's guy, a low-rent attorney who specialized in making problems disappear for a fee. I had met him once years ago. He had weak hands and shifty eyes. "Mr. Bell," Brad said, ushering him in. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Let's just get this done," Simon mumbled. He wouldn't look at me. They guided me to the dining room table, the mahogany table where we had eaten Thanksgiving dinners for 30 years. Simon opened his briefcase. He spread the thick documents across the polished wood. Power of attorney, quitclaim deed, full transfer of assets, life insurance beneficiary modification. It was a complete liquidation of my life. "Just sign here, Frank," Brad said. He stood behind me, his hand resting on the back of my chair. It felt like a claw. He pushed a heavy silver pen into my hand. "It's just standard procedure," Brad lied, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "This lets us pay the bills while the accounts are frozen. We're doing this for you. Sit down, Frank," Jessica said softly. She pulled out the chair. "Make it easy on yourself." I sat. The wood was hard beneath me. I looked at the papers. I looked at the signature line. Frank J. Miller. I looked at the pen. My heart hammered against my ribs, vibrating the wire. This was the moment. I had to get them to commit. I had to get them to threaten me on tape. I held the pen over the dotted line. I let my hand tremble violently, the tip of the pen hovering inches above the paper. The air in the room instantly vanished. Brad's mask slipped. The grieving son-in-law evaporated. The desperate cornered animal took over. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the china cabinet rattle. "Sign the damn paper, Frank," Brad yelled. "We don't have time for this." I kept shaking. "Why are you yelling? I need time to think." "We don't have time," Brad roared. He grabbed my shoulder, his fingers digging into my muscle. "Tony the shark isn't waiting for you to think. Sign it or you'll wish you died with her." "Gotcha." I stopped shaking. I slowly put the pen down on the wood. The sharp click echoed in the quiet room like a gunshot. I sat up straight. I rolled my shoulders back. The slump in my spine disappeared. I looked up. The fog was gone from my face. My eyes were clear, cold, and sharp. I looked Brad dead in the eye. "I'm not signing anything," I said. My voice was pure steel. Brad blinked. He took a step back, confusion washing over his panic. "What?" "I know about Tony," I said clearly, for the microphone. Simon Bell froze. He slowly began to back away from the table, clutching his briefcase. "I know about the $850,000 you owe him by noon," I continued. Jessica's face went completely white. She chewed her lip until a drop of blood bloomed on her chin. "Dad, stop," she begged, her voice a whisper. "I won't stop," I roared, standing up without the cane. I kicked the hickory stick away. It clattered across the floor. "I know about the $600,000 you stole from Alice last year." I took a step toward Brad. He looked small now, weak. "And I know about Chloe," I said. "I know about the condo in Chicago. I know you're leaving my daughter the second you get my money." Jessica gasped loudly. It was a wet, ugly sound. She looked at Brad in horror. You're leaving," she whispered. Brad's face twisted. He was cornered. He bared his teeth. "Your father never wanted you here." Brad spat at Jessica, trying to deflection. "He hates us." "I know you refilled her digoxin 7 times, Jessica," I yelled, my voice shaking the walls of the house I built. "I know you poisoned her tea every single Sunday for 6 months. I know you killed my wife." The silence that followed was absolute. "You crazy old man," Brad snarled, stepping forward. His eyes were murderous. "Nobody will believe a word you say. It's your word against ours." I reached into my shirt collar. I ripped the top button off. I pulled the tiny black wire out into plain view. The red light was blinking steadily. "Blink, blink, blink. They will believe this," I whispered. Brad's eyes widened. Pure, unadulterated terror. Then it turned to explosive rage. He roared. He lunged across the dining table. Brad didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a wild animal, cornered in a trap. Eyes wide, teeth bared, survival instinct overriding everything else. He launched himself across the mahogany table. The fine china centerpiece shattered against the wall. He was 30 years younger than me. He was desperate, and he was strong. He hit me with the force of a falling beam. The impact knocked the wind out of me instantly. We crashed backward, my chair splintering under the combined weight. My head cracked against the hardwood floor, and the world momentarily dissolved into a shower of white sparks. I tried to raise my arms, tried to defend myself, but my limbs felt like they were moving through wet concrete. I was an engineer, not a fighter. I knew how to build things up, not how to brawl on the floor of my own dining room. Brad straddled my chest. His knees pinned my arms to the rug. His face was inches from mine, twisted into a mask of pure veins-bulging hate. His heavy hands clamped around my throat. "You should have just died." Brad screamed, spit flying from his lips onto my face. His thumbs dug deep into my windpipe, crushing the cartilage. I gagged, my mouth opening in a silent scream. "Just like she did," he roared. "She wouldn't shut up about the money. She wouldn't stop asking questions." "Good," my fading mind thought. Say it for the tape." I clawed at his wrists, my fingernails digging into his skin, but his grip was iron. The air supply was cut off. My lungs burned. The room began to darken at the edges, a black vignette closing in on Brad's terrifying face. "Brad, stop!" Jessica screamed. Her voice sounded far away, underwater. "You're killing him." "Shut up, Jess." Brad didn't look back. He squeezed harder. "We don't have a choice. He knows too much." My vision blurred. Black spots danced violently in front of my eyes. The roar of blood in my ears drowned out the rain, drowned out Jessica's sobbing. I stopped fighting. I let my hands drop to the floor. Alice, I thought, I'm coming. I stared up at the ceiling I had painted myself. I was going to die on this floor. But the wire would survive. The red light was blinking beneath his crushing hands. I closed my eyes. Crash. The sound was loud, then thunder. It wasn't the storm. It was the front door splintering into 100 pieces of oak and glass. Police, get on the ground. Now. Heavy, tactical boots pounded the hardwood floor, vibrating through my skull. The pressure on my throat didn't release. Brad was too far gone in his rage. He didn't hear them. He was still squeezing, his face purple with exertion. Then he was gone. Detective Sullivan grabbed Brad by the back of his expensive suit jacket and his hair. With a grunt of effort, he ripped him off my chest and hurled him backward. Brad flew across the room, slamming face first into the drywall. He crumpled to the floor, dazed. Before he could rise, 2 uniformed officers were on him, knees in the back, arms wrenched behind him. The metallic click-click of handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Suspect secured, an officer shouted. Another officer shoved Jessica down onto the expensive Persian rug. Get off me, she shrieked, her voice shrill and panicked. It was him. It was Brad. He made me do it. I lay on the floor, gasping for air. Every breath was a jagged shard of glass in my throat. I coughed, a wet hacking sound, and rolled onto my side. Dr. Evans ran into the room. He knelt beside me, checking my pulse, checking my eyes. Frank, can you hear me? I nodded weakly. I reached up and tapped my chest. Did you get it? I rasped. My voice was ruined. Sullivan walked over. He looked down at me, then at the wire still taped to my skin. He reached down and gently peeled it off. He checked the light. Loud and clear, Frank, Sullivan said. He looked over at Brad, who was being hauled to his feet, blood trickling from his nose. We got the whole thing. Brad looked at me. His eyes were wild, darting around the room, looking for an escape that didn't exist. He's lying, Brad shouted, struggling against the cuffs. That tape is inadmissible. He entrapped me. Sullivan walked up to Brad. He leaned in close, his face hard as stone. You confessed to a murder while trying to commit a second one in front of 6 police officers, Sullivan said quietly. You're done. They dragged him out the door. He was screaming for a lawyer, screaming for Chloe, screaming that it was all a misunderstanding. Then there was only Jessica. An officer pulled her to her feet. Her designer dress was rumpled, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. She looked small, pathetic. She saw me sitting up against the wall, clutching my bruised throat. Dad, she sobbed, tears streaming down her face. Dad, please, tell them. Tell them I didn't know. Tell them Brad forced me. I looked at her. I saw the little girl in pigtails who used to wait for me on the porch. I saw the teenager who learned to drive in my truck. But then I saw the signature on the pharmacy receipts. I saw the emails. I saw the woman who watched her mother die of poison and did nothing because she wanted to keep a condo in Chicago. I slowly stood up. My legs shook, but I locked my knees. I didn't need the cane. I walked over to her. I stood inches from her face. If you walk out that door with him, I had told her 15 years ago, the day she married Brad against my warnings. Don't come back when he breaks you. She remembered. I saw it in her eyes. You signed the receipts, Jessica, I whispered. My voice was gravel and pain. You watched her drink the tea. You watched her die. I was scared, she whimpered. No, I said. You were greedy. I turned my back on her. Get her out of my house, I told the officer. Dad, no, Daddy. She screamed my name as they dragged her out into the rain. I didn't turn around. I listened to her voice fade into the wail of sirens. The flashing red and blue lights pulsed through the broken front door, illuminating the wreckage of my home. Simon Bell, the lawyer, was sitting on the floor in the corner, weeping silently with his hands over his head, waiting for his turn to be cuffed. I stood alone in the center of the room. My throat throbbed, my head pounded. The structure had collapsed. The demolition was complete. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the silence of a grave. I walked to the window and watched the squad cars pull away, taking the last of my family with them. The police lights didn't stop flashing for 6 hours. They painted my living room walls in a rhythmic, nauseating strobe of red and blue. My house, once a sanctuary of quiet evenings and family dinners, became a crime scene. Men in plastic booties walked over the hardwood floors I had installed myself. They dusted the dining table for fingerprints. They bagged the shattered china. They photographed the bruise forming a dark collar around my neck. Detective Sullivan sat with me in the kitchen. He drank my coffee black. "We found a suitcase in the trunk of Brad's car," Sullivan said. He didn't look at me. He was watching a technician tag a bottle of scotch. "Clothes?" I asked. My voice was a rasp, a ruin of what it used to be. "Clothes for warm weather?" Sullivan said, "and a one-way ticket to Costa Rica, departing tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I stared at the steam rising from my mug. "He was leaving her," I whispered. "He was going to kill you, forge the transfer, and be on a plane before the body was cold," Sullivan confirmed. "Jessica was going to be left behind to explain the poison. She was the patsy, Frank. The whole time." I closed my eyes. It didn't make me feel sorry for her. It just made the waste of it all feel heavier. She had sold her soul for a man who viewed her as disposable overhead. The investigation was a slow, grinding machinery. They found everything: the emails, the wire transfers, the pharmacy footage, the poison residue in the soil of the fern in my bedroom. The trial 3 months later wasn't a trial. It was an autopsy of my family, performed in public. I took the stand. I wore my best suit, the one Alice loved. I didn't look at the defense table. I didn't look at Brad, who sat stone-faced and arrogant. I didn't look at Jessica, who looked like a ghost in a gray prison jumpsuit. I played the tape. The courtroom was silent as the grave. The audio was crisp. Brad's voice, distorted by rage, filled the high-ceilinged room. "You should have just died, just like she did." The jury didn't need to deliberate long. It took them less than 2 hours. Brad got life without the possibility of parole. The judge called him a predator of the worst kind. Jessica was complicated. She had cooperated. She had handed over the financial records that nailed Brad for the embezzlement. But she had signed the receipts. She had brewed the tea. 25 years. I walked out of the courthouse alone. Reporters shouted questions. I didn't answer. I got into my truck and drove away. I went back to the house. It was too big now. Too quiet. I sat in the living room for months. The seasons changed outside. Winter turned to a wet, gray spring. But inside, time stopped. I was a ghost haunting my own life. I stopped wearing my hearing aids. I didn't want to hear the silence. I didn't want to hear the house settling, the groans of the timber that sounded too much like footsteps. I checked the mail out of habit, not interest. Bills, flyers, sympathy cards from people I barely knew. Then, 6 months later, a crushed envelope arrived. It was small, white, and dirty. The stamp in the corner was red ink. State Penitentiary Inmate Correspondence. I stood by the kitchen island. My hand hovered over it. I knew that handwriting. It was shaky, cramped, but I knew it. I wanted to throw it in the trash. I wanted to burn it, but I am an engineer. I don't ignore data. I tore it open. "Dad, I know you hate me." "You should. I hate me too. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I know that's gone. I'm writing because I have no one else. I'm pregnant. The doctors say I'm 6 months along. It happened right before everything fell apart." My hands started to shake. I had to lean against the counter. "It's a girl, Dad. The state is going to take her the second she's born. They'll put her in the system, foster care, or worse, they'll give her to Brad's parents. And we both know what they are. Please, don't let the state take her. Raise her, make her better than me, make her like Mom. Name her Alice." I dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to my muddy boot. I stared at it. A child. Brad's child. The spawn of the monster who tried to strangle me. The daughter of the woman who poisoned my wife. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my Zippo lighter. I flicked the lid open. The flame danced, yellow and blue. I picked up the letter. I held the flame to the corner of the paper. "Burn it," a voice in my head screamed. "End it. Burn the bridge. Let the rot end here." The paper started to curl. The brown scorch mark spread toward the handwriting. Then I stopped. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a ghost. I just felt a memory. Alice, standing in this kitchen, flour on her hands, telling me about her day. "Family isn't just blood, Frank," she used to say when we took in stray dogs or helped the neighbors. "Family is what you do. It's the work you put in." I looked at the fire. Then I looked at the word Alice written in my daughter's broken scrawl. I blew out the flame. The smoke curled up into the empty air. I wasn't a demolition expert anymore. The building was down. The dust had settled. Now I had to be an engineer again. I had to build something new from the rubble. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. I grabbed my keys. I drove to the prison. The state prison hospital was a fortress of concrete and misery. It smelled of antiseptic and despair. I sat in a plastic chair, my knees aching, listening to the wail of newborns echoing off the cinder block walls. A nurse walked out. She looked tired. She held a bundle wrapped in a rough institutional blanket. "Mr. Miller?" she asked. I stood up. My joints popped. I felt every day of my 60 years. "That's me." She handed me the bundle. She didn't smile. In this place, nobody smiled. "She's healthy," the nurse said flatly. "The mother signed the surrender papers an hour ago. She refused to see the child." I looked down. The baby was tiny. Her skin was flushed pink. Her eyes squeezed shut against the harsh fluorescent lights. She had a tuft of dark hair. My breath hitched. For a second I saw Jessica. I saw the infant I had held in my own delivery room 30 years ago. The ghost of the girl who would grow up to poison her mother. Fear, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. Is it in the blood? I wondered. Is the rot genetic? Then the baby shifted. A tiny hand, fingers no bigger than matchsticks, reached out and grasped my calloused thumb. She squeezed. It was a weak grip, but it was there. She wasn't Jessica. She wasn't Brad. She was a raw material, a new foundation. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. Holding a clipboard, I looked at the baby's face. I didn't hesitate. "Alice," I said. "Her name is Alice." Raising a child alone at 60 wasn't a retirement. It was an endurance test. The first year was a blur of sleepless nights and back pain. I traded my structural diagrams for feeding schedules. I learned that diapers were more complicated than blueprints. My house, once a silent tomb, became a construction zone of chaos. Plastic toys littered the hardwood floors. The smell of baby powder replaced the smell of old paper and grief. There were nights I sat in the rocking chair, the baby screaming in my arms, and I wept. I wept for my wife. I wept for the daughter I had lost to greed. I wept from pure bone-deep exhaustion. But every morning, when the sun hit the kitchen table, Alice would look at me with those wide, curious eyes, and the dark beam in my chest would lighten. I didn't just raise her. I built her. I taught her to walk on the patio where her grandmother died, reclaiming the ground. I taught her to read using my old engineering manuals. I watched her like a hawk for cracks. Every time she lied about a cookie, every time she got angry, I felt a jolt of panic. Is this it? Is this the start? But she wasn't like them. She had Brad's sharp mind. Yes, but she had my Alice's heart. She brought stray cats home. She cried when she stepped on a snail. She saved her allowance to buy me a new cane when my old one splintered. I never lied to her about her parents, but I didn't tell her the truth. Not yet. Their way, I would say, when she was 5. They made bad choices, I said, when she was 8. They hurt people, I said, when she was 10. But you can't build a skyscraper on a hollow foundation. Eventually, you have to pour the concrete. It happened on her 13th birthday. Alice was smart, too smart. She had found the box in the attic, the box with the newspaper clippings, the box with the trial transcripts I couldn't bring myself to burn. I came home from the grocery store to find her sitting at the dining room table, the same table where Brad had tackled me. She was reading the toxicology report. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She looked up at me, her face pale, her eyes dark and serious. "Did she really do it?" Alice asked. Her voice didn't shake. I put the grocery bags down. The glass jar of pasta sauce clinked against the wood. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. I didn't treat her like a child. I treated her like an engineer looking at a schematic. "Yes," I said. "And him?" She pointed to a photo of Brad in handcuffs. "He tried to kill you?" "Yes." She looked down at the papers. She read the lines about the dioxin. She read the lines about the money. "Why?" she whispered. "Because they wanted things more than they wanted people," I said. "Because they were broken, Alice, and they didn't want to be fixed." She sat there for a long time. The clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tock. Then she pushed the papers away. She stood up, walked over to me, and wrapped her arms around my neck. She buried her face in my shoulder. "I'm not them, Grandpa," she said fiercely. "I'm not them." I held her tight, my eyes squeezing shut. "I know you're not," I whispered into her hair. "You're the best thing I ever built." 15 years went by in the blink of an eye. The seasons turned. My hair went from gray to white. My back bowed a little more. The cane became a necessity, not a prop. But the house was warm. It was full of life. Then the letter came. Department of Corrections. Notice of release. Jessica Miller. Parole granted. Good behavior. Cooperation with the state. I stared at the paper. My hands shook. Just a little. The old anger, the cold steel in my gut, flared up. Grandpa? Alice stood in the doorway. She was 15 now, tall, striking, with eyes that saw everything. She held the car keys. It's today, isn't it? She asked. I nodded. You don't have to go, Alice. I can go alone. I can tell her to stay away. Alice took the letter from my hand. She looked at it, then at me. No, she said. I need to see her. I need to know. Know what? If she's still a monster, Alice said, or if she's just empty. We walked out to the truck. The Seattle sky was gray, threatening rain. It always rained when the past came calling. I climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, a familiar, comforting vibration. I looked at Alice in the passenger seat. She looked out the window, her jaw set, her hands calm in her lap. We weren't going to a reunion. We were going to a final inspection. I put the truck in gear. Let's go, I said. The Washington State Correction Center for Women was a sprawling complex of gray concrete and razor wire, cut into the side of a hill like a scar. The rain had turned the surrounding fields into mud. I parked the truck in the visitor lot. The engine ticked as it cooled. Alice sat in the passenger seat. She didn't fidget. She didn't check her phone. She stared at the heavy steel gate with the same intense, analytical gaze I used when inspecting a load-bearing wall for cracks. You okay? I asked. My voice was rougher than usual. The damp weather made the scar on my neck ache, a deep, phantom throb where Brad's thumbs had been 15 years ago. I'm fine, Alice said. She didn't look at me. I just want to see her. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. The heavy iron pedestrian gate buzzed, an angry mechanical hornet sound. It slid open with a grind of metal on metal. A figure stepped out. I barely recognized her. The Jessica I remembered was sharp edges, designer silk, and manicured nails. She was vanity weaponized. The woman walking toward us was a stranger. She was 50 years old, but she looked 70. Her hair was thin and streaked with coarse gray. She wore ill-fitting jeans and a windbreaker that hung off her skeletal frame. She carried a clear plastic bag with her belongings, a toothbrush, a comb, a few papers. She stopped 10 feet from the truck. The rain plastered her hair to her skull. She looked at the ground, then at the truck, then at me. Her eyes were hollow. The arrogance was gone, scraped away by 15 years in a concrete box. I rolled down the window. The electric motor whirred in the silence. Jessica flinched at the sound. She took a hesitant step forward. She looked at me, and I saw the flicker of fear. She remembered the last time she saw me standing in the wreckage of my living room, disowning her. Hi, Dad, she whispered. Her voice was rusty, unused. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The anger I thought had burned out years ago flared up, hot and sudden. Then Jessica looked past me. She looked at the passenger seat. Alice turned her head. Mother and daughter locked eyes. There was no recognition in Jessica's face, only shock. She was looking at a ghost. Alice looked exactly like her grandmother, at that age. The same dark eyes, the same strong chin, the same quiet dignity. Jessica's hand went to her mouth. She started to tremble. Alice? She breathed. Alice didn't smile. She didn't cry. She rolled down her window. Grandpa told me everything, Alice said. Her voice was calm, clear, and absolutely devastating. Jessica flinched as if she'd been slapped. She looked down at her cheap canvas shoes sinking into the mud. I know, Jessica whispered. I deserve it. He told me about the poison, Alice continued, relentless. He told me about the money. He told me you watched Grandma die and did nothing. Jessica began to weep. Silent, ugly tears that mixed with the rain. She nodded, unable to speak. I gripped the steering wheel. I wanted to drive away. I wanted to leave her in the mud. She was the rot in the foundation. But then Alice spoke again. He also told me that Grandma believed in second chances, Alice said. Jessica looked up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Alice looked her mother dead in the eye. There was no pity in her gaze, only a hard structural assessment. But you have to earn this one, Alice said. You don't get to be my mother just because you gave birth to me. You're a guest. You start from zero." The silence stretched tight between the truck and the woman in the rain. Jessica nodded slowly. "I understand. Zero." Alice looked at me. She gave a single, small nod. I let out a breath. I felt like I'd been holding for a decade. I pressed the unlock button on the door panel. Click. The sound was loud in the quiet cab. Jessica opened the back door. She climbed in. She smelled of industrial soap and stale, recycled air. She sat close to the door, making herself as small as possible, afraid to touch the upholstery. I put the truck in drive. The tires spun for a second in the wet gravel, then caught traction. We pulled away from the prison. I watched the razor wire fade in the rearview mirror. I didn't forgive my daughter that day. I don't know if I ever fully will. The trust was demolished, and you can't rebuild a skyscraper on sand. But as I drove down the highway, the wipers slapping a steady rhythm, I looked at Alice. She was watching the trees pass by. She looked light. The burden of the mystery was gone. She had faced the monster and found only a broken woman. She caught my eye in the mirror and smiled. It wasn't a guarded smile, it was real. The cycle was broken. The structural failure stopped here. We turned onto our street. The clouds broke, just for a moment, letting a shaft of pale sunlight hit the wet pavement. I pulled into the driveway. The house stood there, solid, weathered, enduring. I turned off the engine. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. "We're home," I said, and for the first time in 15 years, I actually believed it. Thank you for standing with Frank through the collapse and the rebuilding. Stories like this remind us that while some foundations crumble, the truth is the one beam that never bends. If you felt the weight of this journey, please leave a like to honor that resilience. And if you want to be part of the next chapter, to uncover more buried secrets and hard-won redemptions, subscribe and stay with us. We'll see you in the next story.